Okay, great. Welcome everybody to the October 2021 edition of Streets for All Happy Hour. We're super excited to have Santa Monica City Councilmember Gleam Davis on with us. And before we get to our conversation with Gleam, we are going to give you an update on state measures now that the legislative year is coming to an end, talk about 25 by 25, talk about some upcoming mobility debates we have going on, discuss opportunities to implement our mobility plan when the city repaves streets, give an update on Venice Boulevard For All, an update on Eagle Rock BRT, and we'll get to our conversation with Gleam. Our icebreaker this time is, what is your favorite Ciclovia memory? And Gleam, if you'd like to answer it, we'd welcome that too when we start our conversation. So I'm going to pass it over to Bubba, who is going to give us an update on state measures and answer this question. Bubba.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for being here, Gleam. Appreciate it. My favorite Ciclovia memory of the last one on Sunday was running into another steering committee member, Josh. I like running into people serendipitously at Ciclovia. It doesn't happen enough in everyday life. So we've made a really big effort in this legislative session at Streets for All to support some of the state measures coming out of Sacramento, and there were a lot of really good bills in this cycle. We supported 8 bills, and if you go to the next slide, we ran a pretty aggressive campaign. We sent out information on social media, share cards. We did email blasts encouraging people to call their state senators and assembly members. So and get these bills through committee through each floor of the Senate and Assembly, and to get signed by the governor. We were there at every stage. We are excited that 3 of the bills we supported, if you go to the next slide, were signed by the governor last week. The first, AB 43, is a really impactful bill that will allow cities to lower their speed limits, and it will let LADOT lower hundreds of miles of speed limits. This bill basically will help alleviate a lot of the issues around the 85 percentile rule. If you're familiar, currently, if you want to lower your speed limit, the evaluation to what the speed limit should be currently as state law is whatever 85% of traffic is flowing at, whatever speed 85% of traffic is flowing at, which really is not a very good policy for creating safe streets. So AB 43 helps address that. AB 917 allows transit agencies to use cameras to enforce bus-only lanes and ticket those parked in bus-only lanes, strengthening our bus-only lanes for those folks who rely on transit. And AB 773 allows cities to make their slow streets programs permanent, create more open streets events, even on state highways within their jurisdiction. So we put a lot of effort and energy behind these bills, and we're excited to see them pass. On the other hand, here are 4 bills that made it all the way to the finish line. And lo and behold, Governor Newsom, who of course we've supported in the against the recall effort, and a lot of progressives rallied around him during that time, vetoed. The logic for doing that he wrote about in his veto messages really wasn't sound and was actually quite victim blaming. So there was a bill that would have created a program to build new bicycle highways across the state, and basically judge every new program that a transit agency or government agency wanted to create against climate goals. That got vetoed by the governor. A bill to decriminalize jaywalking, which was manufactured by car companies to claim the streets for cars, that was vetoed. And then AB 339, which would have mandated a remote option for all city council and neighborhood council meetings, which is really paramount to the work that we do and the work that climate and transportation advocates do. That was vetoed. And a bill that would have legalized the bicycle safety stop, or treating stop signs as yield signs for cyclists, which is common behavior and also proven to be safer behavior. All of that was vetoed by the governor. And again, the governor used language kind of blaming cyclists for a significant portion of their own fatalities, and just some kind of really backwards thinking that we were surprised to see from the governor. So we really need to engage with the governor's office. We need to engage with the authors of these bills to try to get them, to come back in the next legislative session. So that's what we're going to be doing very soon. If you go to the next slide, this is the net of it all. 3 bills passed out of the 8 we supported. 1 died in committee. That was AB 1401, which would have abolished parking minimums near transit. And then 4 were vetoed by the governor, unfortunately. So if you go to the next slide, this is what we want to accomplish in the next legislative year. We want to get more involved in the actual drafting of the policy, working with some of the organizations listed below to help do that. So pushing some of our own policy ideas. If you have any of those, please, of course, message in the Slack or email us. We also want to get more visibility around how legislators vote on transportation and climate issues. So we want to have that available on our website so that people know how their senators and assembly members are doing on these issues. And we want to get more email subscribers. We want to get more addresses for our email subscribers so we can better target them for the, based on their Senate district, their assembly district, their council district. And we want to work closer with our allies like CalBike, People for Mobility Justice, Investing in Place, and the rest of these organizations to help push good policy. So if you want to get involved in this, I'll put a link in the chat for you to get involved in our state advocacy efforts. It's really important and it's super impactful. So we'd love to have your help. Thanks. And I'll turn it over to Michael for 25 by 25.
Thanks, Bubba. My favorite Ciclavia moment happened this past Sunday. My 5-year-old daughter, I saw right behind me biking through downtown LA, which was surreal, crossing Figueroa on 7th Street. And she just learned to ride a bike a year ago. So that was pretty special. All right, I'm going to give everybody a sneak preview of a campaign we are about to launch. It's a 45-second video. Here we go. So we copied this concept with permission from our friends on the East Coast Transportation Alternatives. They launched this about 8 months ago in New York. And the point was to get everybody running for office to agree to reallocate 25% of public streets back to the people and away from cars. In LA, this could mean alfresco dining, parklets, plazas, bike lanes, bus lanes, and every other tool we have where public space is for people. We're going to be launching this soon, and our goal is to get everybody running for LA City Council and the mayor's office to publicly commit to reallocating 25% of their district or of the city back to people by 2025. So we're excited about it, and stay tuned for the launch very soon. I'm now going to turn over to Adrian to talk about our upcoming mobility debates. Adrian.
Thank you so much, Michael. As I'm sure you're aware, LA City Council elections for certain council districts are going to be coming up in 2022. And we have a series of mobility debates that we have planned for these candidates. Next slide, please. Our first debate is going to be October 25th at 5:30. And it is going to feature the candidates running for Council District 5, which is currently held by Paul Koretz. So we're very excited that one of these 6 candidates will be taking over for Paul Koretz. I'm sure any of them will be better than he has been on mobility issues. So this is going to be a really great event. If you want to RSVP to this, just visit the bit.ly link on the screen. So this event is going to be moderated by us, Streets for All. And we're going to allow 1 minute per candidate for opening statements and then 45 minutes of curated questions from the Streets for All Steering Committee. And then audience will have an opportunity to ask questions for 30 minutes, followed by closing statements from each candidate. And coming up next, probably in November, will be the CD13 mobility debate. We're reaching out to the candidates right now to get this plan. So stay tuned. Hopefully we will have some more details for you soon as to when the CD13 mobility debate will be. And I'm going to send it back to Michael to talk about the repaving and mobility plan.
Thanks, Adrian. So as I think most people know on this Zoom, our city has a 2035 mobility plan, which is chock full of bike lanes and bus lanes. This is a partial map of the city of Los Angeles. Dark green are protected bike lanes, light green are painted bike lanes, and dark blue are dedicated bus lanes. And everywhere you see in red is where the city is planning on repaving the street. And each time they repave the street, it's an opportunity to implement our mobility plan. Because of past lawsuits, the city will not implement bike lanes on imperfect pavement, which means they basically need the street to be repaved before they add new bike lanes. We are too broke to implement the mobility plan outside of repaving, so we can't call for a special repaving to implement bike lanes. And Streets LA, or the Bureau of Street Services, our agency that repaves streets, can move really quickly in repaving, but LADOT is tasked with getting the political will and doing the outreach to the communities, and that's a lot slower. So our goal here is to align the city departments and get ahead of the repaving schedule so we can implement the mobility plan when the repaving comes. We've created a public Google Doc, and it's divided into 4 categories. So the first one is an upgrade opportunity. So for example, if it says existing class 2, that means it's a unprotected bike lane. And if it says mobility plan 4, that means the mobility plan calls for class 4 bike lanes or protected bike lanes. So this is an opportunity to upgrade from what currently exists to actually implement our mobility plan. And of course, it's divided by council district. The second category is implement. So here we're starting from scratch. Nothing exists today, but the mobility plan has treatment. So in all of these examples, there's nothing exists, and these are all class 4 protected bike lanes that should be implemented. If it says complete, that means that the city has already implemented its mobility plan, and when they repave, they'll restripe the bike lane that is already there. And then, of course, there are bus lane opportunities, which we're also going to fight for. So here's the bit.ly link. It's bit.ly/mobility-plan. If you want to see the sheet, it's the next 3 fiscal years of repaving overlapped with the mobility plan. We've sent this to LADOT and Streets LA, and we hope that this sheet becomes the de facto dashboard that everybody is working on. Stay tuned for calls to action on advocacy you can do to make sure it's implemented. I'm now going to pass it over to Katrina to give us an update on Venice Boulevard For All.
Thanks, Michael. I'd have to say that my favorite Ciclovia memory was also from this past weekend. It was my first time taking my own bike to Ciclovia. Previously, I'd been living in Koreatown and hadn't felt, comfortable enough biking, and I'd been renting Metro bikes the whole time. And since moving to Palms, I've had my own bike, biking a lot more in that area. And it was a great sense of, freedom to take my bike on the train, take it anywhere, park it anywhere. Now, I'm here to talk about Venice Boulevard For All, which is a campaign that Streets For All had initiated before the pandemic at the end of 2019 and early 2020. It's related to the repaving that Michael was just talking about. There's some repaving that's scheduled for between 405 and Motor Avenue and then all the way to the 10. And we're here to advocate for implementing the mobility plan during this repaving, which includes protected bike lanes, 24-hour bus lanes, and enhanced pedestrian districts all along Venice Boulevard. Now, why Venice Boulevard? Venice Boulevard used to be, is California State Route 187. It's treated as a highway and administered by Caltrans. However, it was turned back over to the city, along with some money to implement these mobility improvements. And the map here shows, the initial project area, the part that was State Route 187, but our campaign is going to advocate for these types of improvements all the way from the sea to downtown, essentially. Now, if you go to the next slide, you can see a diagram of what Venice Boulevard looks like right now. It's 3 lanes in either direction typically, and an unprotected bike lane. However, it's a major thoroughfare for not only cars, but also bus users as well as bike users. And so in the next diagram, this is a vision that we're hoping to promote to make a better, safer, more pleasant Venice Boulevard experience for all kinds of road users. And if you want to get involved in this more, you can go to the link that Bubba dropped in the chat to get involved. I just joined the Palms Neighborhood Council Transportation Committee and will be spearheading the outreach in the coming days, so stay tuned. And I'll turn it over to Kyle, who's going to talk about Eagle Rock BRT.
Thanks, Katrina. So I think my favorite Ciclovia memory was a couple years ago at the one in Mid-City and Pico area. And it was just nice to be on foot in that area because I've driven through a number of times. And once I set foot on Pico, I realized, wow, I've never actually walked this strip of LA. And so it was just really cool to interact with people. And I had a couple cool interactions there related to school and even just not related to school. And so it was a fun time. Okay, so as you know, we're following the NoHo to Pasadena BRT project very closely, having launched a site where you can petition city council and other officials to support the Beautiful Boulevard proposal, as you can see beautifully rendered here. Recently, Councilmember De Leon hosted an in-person open house that was on Saturday, October 2nd, and we were enthused and surprised a bit by the high turnout and the fact that this proposal and this project is gaining positive momentum and really growing support. And so we're hoping to see a decision being made sometime soon here, and we want that decision to be the Beautiful Boulevard proposal. And we'll keep you posted on any additional opportunities to chime in and see it through. So I'll now pass it to Michael, who's going to introduce our guest speaker.
Thanks, Kyle. Quick preview, we're taking November off because we're very busy with the council district debates. But in December, we're excited to have Supervisor Holly Mitchell, who will be joining us December 8th at 5 p.m. So I'm very excited to now introduce Gleam. Gleam has been on the Santa Monica City Council since February 2009, and she's been active in progressive causes for over 3 decades. Before she moved to Santa Monica in 1986, she graduated from Harvard Law School and served in the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. Prior to joining the City Council, Gleam was co-chair of the Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights and served on the Santa Monica Planning Commission. She also served as co-chair of the Santa Monica Child Care and Early Education Task Force. On the City Council, she has championed housing as a civil right, lifelong learning, sustainability, workers' rights, mobility, and establishing Santa Monica as a city of well-being. She served as mayor of Santa Monica in 2019, and during her tenure, she helped found Santa Monica's first Pride Festival, expanded activities celebrating Black History Month and Juneteenth, and brought together local and international activists for the city's first well-being summit. She is married and has 1 son who is a lieutenant in the U.S. Army. Welcome, Gleam. It's great to have you. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, trying not to get any background noise. I have my dog in here with me, so.
No problem. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
So starting off, I was born in Santa Monica in 1980. And when I was born, there were no bike lanes, there was no green paint, there were no bump outs. Given Santa Monica's size and geography, a bike or scooter is kind of the perfect way to get around town. What do you attribute the city's metamorphosis from basically zero to probably the preeminent example of multimodality in Southern California?
Well, let me start out with my favorite Ciclovia memory, which was the one out
Please.
in the valley. I'm not much of a cyclist, I have to confess that, but what we did was I have many friends who live out in the valley, and it was the perfect opportunity for us to get around, walk around, get together, walk around and eat. It was just a lovely afternoon and something we don't do enough of because of the distance between us. So that was a wonderful memory. So I think, Santa Monica's metamorphosis, there are a couple of reasons for it. And one is having a progressive city leadership that includes the city council, but also the city manager, city staff, people who recognize that mobility is not just a key to having people get around, but it's a climate change issue. It's actually a social justice issue. And so I think that a lot of the commitment to do it came from just a set of values shared by the city leadership. I think the other reason, quite honestly, is that we are lucky enough, at least up until COVID, to have a fairly robust local economy, which generated sufficient money to do a lot of these capital intensive infrastructure projects. For example, two that I'll mention because I was sort of involved in their creation was when I was on planning commission and we were planning for the arrival of the E line, but I still call it the Expo Line. You know, it dawned on us, how do people get from 4th and Colorado to the pier? And that led to a conversation that said we should create a bike-friendly, pedestrian-friendly way for people to get there. And that led to the creation of the Esplanade. Similarly, when we were doing our downtown community plan, it dawned on me that the west side of Ocean Avenue is perfect for a bike lane because there aren't any curb cuts. There are no buildings there, no driveways there, and no streets that intersect, at least for large chunks of it. And so we said that a cycle track on the west side of Ocean would be part of our downtown community plan. And then we were able to expedite it in part due to COVID, because we know so many more people were getting around using micromobility as well as bikes. So, you know, it's having shared values, political will, but also having the resources to do it.
I think a lot of politicians, including in Los Angeles, supposedly have those values, but they don't actually necessarily see these things through. You've been a consistent supporter of things like bike lanes. Many politicians see bike lanes as either a nuisance or bikes as a hobby, not a real transportation method. And I'm especially curious because you just said you're not really that much of a cyclist. What do you attribute? What experience or what book did you read or what happened in your life that you became such a progressive champion of these things?
Well, I mean, maybe it's just sort of lifelong experience. Growing up in the San Gabriel Valley in a family of modest means, doing a lot of civil rights work, both in my time at the Department of Justice, but even while in private practice, recognizing that even if I'm not a cyclist, that cycling is important, as I said, not just as, you know, a recreational opportunity, although it certainly is, but that for people who work in our local hotels and our restaurants who can't afford an automobile. Automobiles are incredibly expensive. Not only do they burden the environment, but they burden the pocketbook. And so creating a safe environment for people to get to work, creating a better environment for families to get around. Housing is incredibly expensive in Santa Monica, and owning a car on top of that can make it prohibitively expensive to live in Santa Monica. So if we could create a system of non-automobile lanes, green lanes. I hate to call them bike lanes because they're utilized by scooters and skateboarders and tons of other people. But green lanes, then people might be able to not have to own an automobile or as many automobiles or drive it as much to live in Santa Monica, and it actually might make Santa Monica more affordable for them. So it comes from a variety of experiences, but a focus on affordable housing, a focus on workers' rights, and an understanding that mobility is key for so many people. If you're lucky enough to be wealthy enough that you ride your bike just for fun, great, that's fantastic. For a lot of people, it's just an economic necessity.
Have you guys been able to do a study or figure out how many car trips you've eliminated by making biking and scooting and skateboarding?
We haven't done it something that comprehensively. I will say we did a scooter pilot program, and at the end of essentially 18 months, we figured out that we'd replaced about 500,000 car trips with scooter trips. Now they're very short trips, but they're nevertheless car trips that were not taken. And I don't remember off the top of my head, but we did cause that to calculate, you know, a tonnage of greenhouse gases that we were able to avoid emitting into the air. So, you know, if you think about that, that's a lot of car trips to eliminate over an 18-month period. And it shows two things. It shows, one, that the bulk of the car trips that people take are relatively short and perfect to be replaced with micro mobility, cycling, walking, depending on what makes sense in that particular environment. And two, that if you can create a form of transportation, I think one of the reasons scooters took off so quickly is they're fun. You know, biking is fun. So I think that you can sort of create recreational, fun ways to get around, and yet they can be purposeful in terms of people using them to get to work and for more what I'll call serious transportation needs. So I think that's you know, been a real success story in Santa Monica.
So Santa Monica is obviously surrounded on all three sides by the city of Los Angeles. And as a cyclist, when you cross that border, you can sure tell the green paint quickly goes away, the pavement changes. To what degree does Santa Monica try to coordinate with Los Angeles? Because the average person doesn't know where the border is. So there can be consistent improvements along stretches of road.
Not as much as we should, or we would like to. You know, it's sort of interesting. I take the 3 bus. I work in El Segundo for AT&T. You can all boo me later, or put yourself on mute and boo me now. And so I take the 3 bus down Lincoln, and it's really interesting because we have rush hour bus lanes on Lincoln. And then of course, once you get into city of LA, there are no bus lanes on Lincoln. But conversely, there are bus lanes on Wilshire in the city of Los Angeles until you get into Santa Monica, where there are no rush hour bus lanes. So we have been talking to Mike Bonin's office about, in those 2 areas, trying to coordinate the two. You know, I honestly think we need to look for full out dedicated bus lanes. I just don't think that rush hour bus lanes solve the problem for 2 reasons. One is, I actually, when I get on the 3 bus, I'm going against the bus lanes, so it doesn't help me much, so I'm very selfish. And 2, I think when you have temporary or, you know, points in time bus lanes, you get a lot of things blocking the bus lane, because people are like, I don't know, this is the time or whatever. Whereas if you had red paint and said, stay out of this is a bus lane, I think you'd be able to not have to compete with the people who aren't aware of it. So we do try and coordinate with Mike Bonin's office. We should do it more. You know, I've been disappointed, in all honesty. You know, we recently revamped our scooter pilot, and one of the criteria I thought we should have used, and we didn't, in deciding what operators we would select, and a micro mobility pilot. I shouldn't call it a scooter pilot because it involves sit-down scooters and 3-wheeled scooters and also e-bikes, is that if anyone was operating in the city of LA, we ought to let them operate in Santa Monica, for the very reason that we know we have a lot of people that travel from West LA, Westwood, even Venice, and, you know, Marina Del Rey, and come up here and then cross into Santa Monica. And it just makes sense to have that kind of integrated service. Now, we didn't do that. And one of the providers we did not select was Bird. And it's been sort of interesting to see people, they're allowed to ride the Birds into Santa Monica, but they cannot be activated in Santa Monica. And I can't tell you how many people I've had to warn as they're standing over the Bird, wondering why it's not going to work, to say it's not going to operate in Santa Monica. Then of course, Bird then has to come pick them up. So that seems very wasteful and inefficient to me. I think that we need to coordinate. If there's a micro mobility provider in Santa Monica, they ought to operate in LA and vice versa, so that you know, the issue of where Santa Monica begins and ends isn't one for people trying to use these alternative forms of transportation.
Well, luckily for you, LADOT is going to install bus lanes, I think, on both sides of Lincoln pretty soon. So
yep,
hopefully your commute will get better.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful.
So it's interesting. Santa Monica has not done, from a bike lane or a bus lane point of view, other than Lincoln, has not done many changes on its major streets, Olympic, Santa Monica, Wilshire. Most of the improvements have been on sort of quieter, secondary, parallel streets. I'm so curious, and I think about this when I'm cycling on them. Did Santa Monica just get lucky with the width of its streets, where you could just drop in bike lanes, not to take anything away?
Yeah, I honestly think we did. And some of the decision about choosing like our dedicated lanes on Broadway, and we're going to start working on our 17th Street bike improvements, is that, and I always say this because I'm not a very good or, dedicated cyclist, is that while we certainly want to create cycling opportunities for people who are already experienced and confident bike riders, the change is really going to come when the people who are less confident on a bike or on a scooter or whatever feel safe on our streets. And so rather than sort of throw people even in a dedicated lane, unless it's really, meaningfully separated from traffic, being able to put them on Broadway and 17th Street, which are just normally quieter streets and easier to control traffic speeds, I think allows people opportunities to get around, but without sort of tackling, oh my God, the white knuckling of driving a bike down Wilshire. So yeah, we did get lucky that we had wide enough streets where we were able to implement some really meaningful cycling structure. I will tell you though, it's an ongoing fight. Just once you get it installed isn't enough. I'll just give you two examples that we're really confronting here in Santa Monica that we have a new city manager who just started this week, and they're on my list of things to talk to him about. One is, even though we have these dedicated bike lanes on Ocean and they're very heavily used, people keep parking in them because they're not sufficiently delineated from the road. And in all honesty, I have pictures of city vehicles parked in the bike lane. And so that's a real cultural thing that we need to change. And it's part enforcement, part education, but we need to get people out of those bike lanes. The other thing is I've been a big fan, having been in Europe and seeing them in action of Dutch intersections. And we installed one at the corner of the California Incline, California, I think it's Street, Boulevard, and Ocean Avenue as the end of our cycle track. And the neighbors there continue to lobby us on a very active basis to take it out because it removed a right turn lane when it created a safe lane for cyclists. And it's a classic example of people saying, but you're interfering with my driving. I want to turn right faster, versus, creating a safe opportunity for cyclists. So, it's an ongoing battle. Even though the infrastructure is there, people want us to take it out.
Switching to the train, the Expo Line came to Santa Monica in 2016. I think that was the first time in over 60 years that LA actually had a train from downtown LA to the ocean. How has that impacted the city? And do you think you guys will lobby to extend the Purple Line further down Wilshire to the ocean as well?
Well, it's obviously, in my mind, been a huge boon to the city. I mean, the ability for me in my day job when I need to go to downtown to take the Expo Line rather than drive is huge. And it's, ridership on that line skyrocketed far beyond the initial projections. I think I saw Pam O'Connor, who was on here, who, really facilitated the bringing of Expo Line to Santa Monica, as well as creating 3 stations within our town, which was really important. So I think it's been wonderful. There are people in town who still refer to it as the crime train, who believe it's brought crime. We studied it, it hasn't, but names like that die hard. We do have, I think, as everyone knows, an issue with unhoused people in Santa Monica. And there is some sense that if we didn't have the train, we wouldn't have the same number of unhoused people. I think that's wrong. But again, myths are hard to kill. And so, I think that the train is amazing, especially as the transit network continues to build out. For example, again, the 3 bus can take a long time to go down Lincoln. So I'm looking forward to the opening of the Crenshaw line, which, I can take Expo to the Crenshaw line and take it down to a stop near my office, and I'll be perfectly happy. It's a little more circuitous space-wise, but I think it'll be probably no longer and maybe a little bit more pleasant than sitting in traffic, at least until those bus lanes on Lincoln get installed. In terms of subway to the sea, certainly Santa Monica has continued to advocate for that. We've advocated at the West Side Council of Governments to try and make that one of our regional priorities. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not. And for a couple of reasons. One is obviously expense. It's very expensive. Subway, boring, even though it's cheaper than it used to be, is still expensive. But my impression is, and this is sort of what you hear whispers, and again, Pam O'Connor may have heard some of the same whispers, is that a lot of transit people are like, why should we spend money building subway to the sea if we're not confident that Santa Monica is going to build the kind of density that justifies that heavy transit investment. The last thing we want to do is spend $1 billion and then, have one-story buildings around our transit stops. So I think, we need to show a greater commitment on our part to densification to really show that we need mass transit and that we're willing to build around it in such a way that it'd make it useful for everyone.
So Santa Monica has a bus-only lane on Lincoln, as you mentioned. I think you also have some through the downtown core, but I don't think there's any others. What is the plan on adding more bus lanes in the city? For example, would you guys stripe a bus lane to the ocean along Wilshire from the LA border?
Yeah, and yeah, we have them on Broadway and Santa Monica Boulevard in our downtown and along Lincoln. There has been talk of expanding the bus lanes on Wilshire from Los Angeles into Santa Monica, particularly, to complement the subway, which ends strangely at the VA. I mean, it's just a strange place to put it. And I was part of a group that lobbied to at least bring it to Bundy, where there were actually people, but obviously no money and no will. But yeah, so I think that as that becomes closer to reality, and as I said, we're coordinating with Mike Bonin's office now about putting bus lanes into Santa Monica on Wilshire. Hopefully, we won't wait for the subway to open, or that's a very long time down the road. We can do that fairly easily.
Great. So my last question, then I'll open up to the audience, is pedestrianizing streets in the city of Los Angeles is seen as a business killer and crime and all sorts of counter arguments to it. But 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica, the number I have is it generates 15% of the sales tax revenue for the city. So why aren't there more 3rd Streets in Santa Monica? We've been following your experiment on Main Street. I think that's about to end. Could that be extended? Could it be made permanent? Are there other opportunities for pedestrianizing streets in the city?
Well, there are tons of opportunities for pedestrianizing streets. Yeah, and the promenade has been incredibly successful. And I'll say that as we come out of COVID into what I'm sort of calling COVID light or COVID stasis, our pedestrian counts on the promenade are back at 2019 levels for many times a day and times of the week. So where people are starting to come out, I think they're hungry to come out. And as you say, we have been doing this very small pilot program on Main. Our last weekend is this coming weekend. It's got a Halloween theme, looks to be a lot of fun. So check it out if you can. And I think that is a precursor to trying to look for more opportunities to more regularly pedestrianize parts of Main Street, and maybe ultimately, which would be fine with me, is pedestrianize Main Street from Pico down to the Venice border. That's probably a long ways off. The impediments to doing so are many. Should they be impediments? Probably not, but they're there. And the first one is cost. There is a cost associated with any infrastructure project. One of the issues, for example, with pedestrianizing Main Street is that as a major bus thoroughfare, we could easily put buses on Nielsen. The problem is that the sidewalks there are not ADA compliant for bus traffic. So we'd actually have to change the infrastructure, probably take a lane of traffic off of Nielsen, which would be fine with me because I actually live at the corner of Pacific and Nielsen. But to build wider sidewalks that could accommodate ADA requirements for bus traffic. So that gets very expensive. So some is cost. The second one is, and I don't know any other way to say it, but cranky old people who, hey, get off my street, who any change like that they fear will cause a change in traffic patterns and adds traffic on their street. And they do tend to be older, whiter, have more resources. So they are able to lobby very vociferously. I mean, I will tell you, even though the surveys we've done of the Open Main Streets project has generated more than 90% of the people being in favor of it, they continue to argue. They're still trying to cancel this weekend, and it's Wednesday. because they claim that it has, infected the neighborhood with traffic. I've actually walked it during the Main Street open times, and it looks just like it does any other time. But, it's a good story to tell. And so you have people who are afraid of change and are definitely willing to express that fear of change in the hallways of City Hall. I think the third impediment is getting people to really visualize it, if that makes sense. And that's why a pilot program like what we've been doing has been so good. We actually, a lot of the comments are, I wish it wasn't a block and a half. I wish it was a larger chunk of the street. But, a lot of businesses had a lot of trepidation at the beginning. How are people going to get to my business? And then it turns out they actually get more business on the pedestrianized street. So it's getting people to sort of understand the vision and how the street will work, and that it's okay if cars aren't driving by your store, because if they're driving by their store, they're not seeing what's in your store anyway. Whereas if someone's walking by your store, they may actually look in your window and be intrigued by what you're offering. So it's just getting that mindset to change and getting people to understand the vision, which is also an impediment. And it's education. And that's why these pilot programs are useful, because they can at least get people to sort of run the movie in their head, if they will.
Do you have a majority on the city council right now for stuff like this, or is it an uphill battle?
It's an uphill battle. We did get a majority of the city council to support the open Main Street. It was, I believe it was a 5-2 vote. But I think that if it were to be something other than a pilot or a more extreme closing of Main Street, we might not have a majority. In fact, it was myself and my colleague Christine Parra, who we do 13 items, council member items, who brought it to the council. And Christine almost backed out at the end because she was getting so much negative feedback from people via email before the vote. So I don't know that there's a majority of the council for these kind of visionary changes. It's unfortunate. I mean, last night we adopted our proposed housing element on a 5-2 vote. I was one of the no votes because I honestly think that, we adopted a housing element that encouraged driving, but didn't encourage much housing development. So, we have a council right now that I think does not share that vision I talked about. That I will just tell you, to me, was a horrifying story where one of my colleagues, Phil Brock, mentioned that the reason we had to have parking in every housing development is because people like his 92-year-old mother, who still drives, needs to have a place to park her car so she can drive to medical appointments. And all I could think of is, I know where she lives and I'm not going into that neighborhood for fear that that poor woman is driving around at the age of 92. I mean, if she doesn't at the age of 92 have an option other than driving herself, we're doing something wrong.
Also keeps you healthy, moving your body to get around. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and we have some questions from the audience. First question, Santa Monica was early to bike share with Breeze and scooters. With the pilot program, would Santa Monica consider hosting an expansion of Metro's regional bike share system?
I actually think we're in talks to do that. And there was a little bit of a hiccup. I think many people know that Francie Steffen, who was head of our primary mobility efforts, has now moved on to Seattle, where she's got a great job. But before she left, I think she was beginning that conversation with Metro to try and bring the bike share system here. I don't know the status of it, but I know they're having conversations about that. It makes perfect sense because the border is so artificial. Why not just have all of these mobility options available, whether you're in Santa Monica or City of LA?
Next question from Ian. They moved to Santa Monica from Brooklyn last year and chose Santa Monica because of its pedestrian cycle friendliness and good transit access. He was active with transportation alternatives. What's the best way to support a people-forward agenda for Santa Monica's public spaces?
Well, there are some local groups in town. Santa Monica Spoke, which is very active in lobbying in the city and in the region for non-automobile alternative. Santa Monica Forward, which has a broader mission, talks about housing, but also advocates for transportation alternatives. So I think there are those kinds of groups. And then I hate to say it because it's boring, but keep an eye out on city agendas. They're available on the city council website. And if you see something that catches your eye, please feel free to call in or come to city council when we begin having people come and testify in public, whatever your pleasure is. And let us know what you think. We need to hear from people who understand that the future of Santa Monica and the future of the world really needs to rely far less on automobiles and much more on other modes of transportation. And I will say, I just want to drop a footnote here that despite Governor Newsom's veto of the remote call-ins for meetings, Santa Monica did pass an ordinance that will allow post-COVID for people to testify via telephone or video.
That's great. Anonymous question, recent changes with the city council. The city has lost mobility staff, budgets have been hurt due to COVID. How will this impact the future of safe streets in Santa Monica?
It makes it harder. The standard answer anytime you want to make a change to anything is we don't have the staff to do it. We lost about a third of our staff due to revenue drops due to COVID. And while we're building back, we're certainly nowhere near where we were before the pandemic hit us. And yes, we've lost important mobility staff, as I mentioned, Francie, Stefan, and some other people. And then unfortunately, the people who remain, I think, are getting a little burned out, if truth be told, because just like the rest of the world, people are asked to do more with less. So I think it will potentially have a negative impact, which is why public advocacy is so important, to keep it a high priority. So when you have fewer resources, you want to make sure that something like safe streets is a high priority, and that's where the resources go. And I also think that it is important, notes recent changes in the Santa Monica City Council, elections have consequences, and it is active and vociferous support for people who believe in a vision of Santa Monica or wherever that truly involves, making the streets safer for people who are not in automobiles. And when given the choice between, housing and parking, choose housing. And given a choice between a street that is safe for people to bike or walk on, or someone to drive 30 miles an hour down, that you choose cycling and walking. I mean, I think our last election in Santa Monica really showed that just at the national level, local elections have serious consequences. So, through electoral politics and through advocacy, making sure that safe streets endeavors get the resources that they need will be key.
Do you see any of the things that are already in the ground being threatened?
Well, as I said, I continue to be lobbied by people who want to take out portions of the cycle track on Ocean, because it did in the southbound Ocean reduce Ocean from 2 lanes to 1. And people claim that it causes all sorts of backup, as well as the intersection of the incline and Ocean. And I actually went up there and sat for a while, on a busy summer day when we're, at our most intense. And I didn't see a lot of traffic backup. I mean, maybe people had to wait an extra 30 seconds. And I guess for some people that's a lifetime. And I certainly didn't see anything that would justify taking out the cycle track, like 5 miles worth of traffic backed up. And even then, I'm not sure I would say that justifies it. But I guess, yeah, I do think it's going to be a constant fight, not just to create new opportunities, but to maintain the ones we have. Traffic remains, even after COVID, a word that people invoke to attack anything they don't like, whether it's housing or street infrastructure or bringing of new types of businesses into the city or building a hotel, whatever. And it's always about traffic. And I always tell people, and they get mad at me, but I say this, is that I would sit in traffic gladly, if I had to drive for an hour a day, if everyone in Santa Monica had adequate housing and food and a good job in medical care. I mean, if you choose to drive a car, you ought to be prepared to sit in traffic because you don't have to drive and there are ways around it. And I'll just give you an example. Ocean Park Boulevard, which I think about 10 years ago, we reduced from 2 lanes to 1 lane. And I still get complaints about that, by the way. But we did have studied it to see what the effect was, and it increased between Lincoln and the end of the city, you know, so about 2 miles. It did cost you 30 seconds of your life. It took you 30 seconds longer to make that 2-mile journey when we went from 2 lanes down to 1. But we also reduced automobile involved accidents, which were both auto versus auto and auto versus pedestrian or cyclist or whatever, by 60%. And so I got so mad at one person, I won't name who it was. I took him to the corner because there are a lot of schools along that street, both Will Rogers Elementary School and John Adams Middle School. And I stood on the corner there where the schools are. And I said, okay, so do you want to start identifying the kids or parents that you want to get hit by cars when we go back to 2 lanes on Ocean Park? And they got mad at me, but I said, but how do I ever justify going back to 2 lanes when I got a monumental reduction in accidents, or you can view it as a monumental increase in the safety of the street? And I think that's just a perfect example of why we need to continue our safe streets initiative throughout the city.
When are you moving to Los Angeles and running?
Never. I'm old.
What is your assessment of the newly formed Department of Transportation and of the director?
That's a loaded question. I do think it made sense both from an economic and from a policy sense to take all of our mobility and put them under one person. You know, we had Francie for a while was in planning, and we had other people in different departments who were addressing this. So I think having all the transportation items being able to be under one person and integrated. You know, I used to complain all the time. For example, we adopted a scooter pilot without sort of thinking what would be the effect on Breeze Bike Share. You know, we thought of them as 2 separate programs, where I view them as the larger micro mobility program. So I think that makes sense. It's also more efficient from a budget standpoint. Ed King is a really smart guy. Ed King has one wonderful talent, which is he is a grant magnet. He can get more grants, but he was formerly, and still is, of course, the Big Blue bus director. And his focus remains, I think, on bus transportation, which I am a huge supporter of, don't get me wrong, but I don't think he has embraced micromobility and other, you know, things that fall under the transportation umbrella quite as robustly as I would have hoped. Some of that may be, and I hate to spread gossip, but I will, that there's a rumor going around that he'll probably be retiring within the next year. And so it's an opportunity maybe to hire someone less steeped in bus lore and more steeped in overall transportation policy.
I think this is probably going to be our last question. So David's been inspired to watch the growth of protected bike lanes and bus lanes. There's an upcoming project you're especially excited about.
Yeah, the 17th Street renovation, which is going to have protected bike lanes, better intersections for bikes, which will really connect the Expo station and even north of the Expo station to Santa Monica College. And I think that's really key, is because when Santa Monica College comes back online, and I just ran into one of the trustees there, they're slowly starting to increase the number of in-person classes again. And it'll probably never be like it was before. But Santa Monica College, even with its anytime, any ride program, which means if you have a Santa Monica College ID, you can ride the bus for free, still is a major traffic generator. And I think having a really solid, protected, safe bike infrastructure from the Expo station down to the college will make a huge difference and encourage a lot more use of Expo for people to get to the college. So I'm really excited about that. The other reason I'm really excited about it is that it's great bike infrastructure in our most economically disadvantaged neighborhood. And there has always been this I don't know what the right word is, I guess myth, I use that word too often, that we shouldn't do bike infrastructure in the poor neighborhoods because they need to park. And to me, those are the people who need the protected bike lanes the most because they can't afford 2 cars. They rely more on alternative means of transportation, and giving them safe ways to get to work, whether they work at the college or work in one of our hotels or work in one of our fabulous restaurants, is really important. So I think we should be prioritizing our economically disadvantaged neighborhoods for exactly this kind of safe infrastructure.
Great. Well, we're basically out of time. Is there any last words or anything else you'd like to talk about?
Well, I just want to say thank you for having me. It was really interesting to hear all the things you're working on. I think the CD5 race is going to be really interesting to see how that comes out. I won't express an opinion. I've already endorsed someone in that race, but I won't tell you who. But
It's probably public, isn't it? Who'd you endorse?
yeah, I think it is Scott Epstein. And it actually wasn't related to mobility issues, so I guess I can say that. But and I tried not to endorse because Katie Yaroslavsky works for a very good friend of mine, Sheila Kuehl. But when Katie decided to rant and rave about her opposition to SB 9 and 10, I felt compelled to act. Yeah, I just really exciting to hear what you're doing, and I hope you'll keep the advocacy up and bring it to Santa Monica, because with our recent changes in the city council, we need voices that, you know, I will leave you with this. One of our council members keeps talking about what the residents want, but when he says residents, he doesn't mean you all. He means the residents that he talks to, which are wealthier, which are older, which are whiter, that want to not only park in front of their house, but then when they drive to your house, want to park in front of your house too. They don't ride transit, they don't ride bikes, they make that very clear. They don't walk anywhere. And so those are the voices that he hears in his ear, and then it comes out of his mouth, this is what the residents want. So it's really important for advocates to make it clear that no, that's not what the residents want. That maybe some residents want that, but other residents want other things, and have a more environmentally sound, more constructive, and frankly, just more sustainable vision for the future of our city and our region. So keep up the good work on the advocacy front. I hope to see you all testifying at a meeting in Santa Monica when these issues come up, because we need you.
Gleam, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Have a good evening, everybody, and hopefully see you in a week and a half at the CD5 debate.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.